So upon someone's suggestion, I just watched Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the Kenneth Branagh movie. You have to understand right out of the gate that Frankenstein is my favorite book of all time. And most movies are not really adapting the book. They kind of take the concept and go in its own direction. This movie is probably the most faithful version I've seen, barring some very glaring ending choices. But besides the last 10 minutes, it's very faithful to the book in many respects. It was an interesting adaptation. I think the way it handles Frankenstein's backstory and his relationships and his character works pretty well. His father and his family and his fiancée, it's very happy and very positive. He's very likable in his own way. So when his life falls apart, it's, actually sad, which is something that is not the case in some other adaptations. It focuses very much on his school days and his descent into obsession, which I like. I like aesthetically, it was very interesting, had some beautiful costumes. And yet I struggle to say that I like it. The movie, I enjoyed the movie, but it didn't, there's something about it that I don't think quite works. The most obvious is the case with its portrayal of the monster, which was pretty weak. Robert De Niro was an unusual casting choice that I'm not sure worked. And just in general, his segments, they failed to capture the initial innocence of the monster and eventually his almost fall to evil through neglect and his guilt after he does commit evil and things of that nature. That whole part of his story just isn't well adapted. It follows the spark notes of the monster's life, but lacks some of the soul of it. The emotion, the meaning feels hollowed out a bit. It lacks a sympathy for him that I think needed to be there. In contrast, I would argue the depiction of Frankenstein carried almost too much sympathy. Kenneth Branagh played Frankenstein himself, and I think that contributed to the filing down of Frankenstein's darker moments. His selfish inaction and chronic inability to take responsibility for the consequences of his actions are downplayed in a way that hurts the overall theme of the story. I still hold that the monster segments were weaker, but that almost serves to heighten the disparity made by the film's blatant favoritism for the creator and the diminishment of the emotional core of the creation. The movie in general struggles to grasp the pathos of the book, but it's following the basic structure. Even the framing device, which I love, the framing device of a Arctic explorer is trying to reach the North Pole, finds Frankenstein, and then Frankenstein tells his story to the Arctic explorer almost as a parable that mirrors the Arctic explorer's story in some respects. And then within Frankenstein's story, there is the monster story, and there's almost 3 levels of narrative going on. And I always love that about the book. And they do attempt to adapt that. The Arctic stuff is pretty weak. It feels rushed in a way it didn't need to be. The way it's framed makes it seem like Frankenstein only has minutes to choke out his story, and considering how long it is, that just garners it an air of unbelievability. The Arctic stuff is pretty weak, the monster stuff is pretty weak, but the Frankenstein stuff generally works. What I do like is that I think they capture his romance pretty well, where she they actually feel like they care about each other, and the tragedy inherent to their romance is actually conveyed. And Helen Bonham Carter, I think, is a good choice. I think she achieves this kind goodness in her portrayal that works pretty well. until we get to the final act. Then you get to the ending, which, like, for the most of the movie, I'm like, well, this kind of follows the story pretty well. This is pretty, like, I feel the final act is insane. They kind of throw out the book and we're like, let's just throw in the Bride of Frankenstein, like, in the final hour. And it blew my mind. I was like, what is it with these adaptions insisting that the monster needs to have something for Elizabeth? Like, this is so an invention of the movies. I don't know why they're so obsessed. Well, I do know, because on paper, from a movie perspective, that actually makes a lot of sense, because you want to condense characters. You are like, okay, there's this one romantic interest pitting Frankenstein and the monster in almost romantic rivals is more efficient storytelling in certain respects, and movies love that. So I get why this is so popular in adaptions, but why? I mean, it's very visually provocative. In fact, I would say that out of all the visuals in the movie, the visuals surrounding that final act with, like, Bride of Frankenstein stuff visually was the most striking in that movie. I'm not sure I like it. I get what it's going for. I'm not sure it works. It feels like jumping the shark a bit. It feels a little nuts. Like, there's a level of realism that the movie kind of keeps to for the most part, and it just feels like all of that kind of goes thrown out the window. There's something very over the top about those segments. It doesn't feel stitched well into the rest of the work, which makes sense because it wasn't in the original book. But that's okay. Overall, I enjoyed it. I do feel like it's missing something. There's an emotional undercurrent that it lacks. It doesn't grip you in a way that it kind of needs to, which leaves some things about it kind of empty, especially with the monster segments, which is a shame because I think it is very sincere in trying to adapt the book, and it feels like it is an adaptation of the book. And in that way, I liked it because I love any depiction of that story, but it could have been better. But what did you think of Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein? Comment down below what you think, and if you liked this review, please subscribe. Also, I feel the need to mention the last review I did, which was of Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, really popped off, and the last time something popped off that much was back in the Rings of Power era that many of you know so well. Back in those days, I made a promise to y'all that if I reached 2,000 subscribers, I would animate a certain Tolkien poem in my terrible art style. And as of now, I have passed 2,000 subscribers, which means that I am gonna have to do that video now. So I better get work on that. That's like 2 minutes of animation, so that'll give me a hot minute. I apologize in advance. But I'll get to work on that. Thank you so much for those who subscribed. You'll get your badly animated present soon. And if you'd like to read a story about monstrous creations wreaking havoc, please check out my book, Bone Song, Diary of a Sentient Sword. I release 2 chapters for free a week in the link below. Happy reading, and take care.